Hi everyone, Ben here. I typically don't like rules. When it comes to making coffee, I love them. The WCE recently released rules for both Brewers Cup and Barista competitions. They are some of the biggest changes that we've seen in quite a while, so I thought it'd be interesting to dive into them, to talk about them a bit and see what this sort of means for the future of the competitions and what we might see in Athens in like 4 or 5 months. So the first one that is super interesting is they changed the rules around the milk beverage. So you can no longer add anything to the milk. This actually has huge implications for even what just happened at WBC. In the top 6, Anthony used cryodesiccated milk, which is freeze-dried milk, and then he added that to his milk. That was no longer allowed. And Patrick Rolfe used an enzyme that broke down the more complex carbohydrates in his milk down to more simple sugars. That is also not allowed. And so it immediately has implications for people that have done really well, and it sort of changes the trajectory of what might be done in a milk course. So now basically nothing can be added to the milk course. Everything is sort of by subtraction. So freeze distilled milk is actually still allowed. What this means for the future of the competition or what happens with the milk course, I think is really interesting. They are also allowing plant-based milks this year, so I think that will sort of be the next change on where milk is going. Whether a plant-based milk can score as high as a regular milk, I'm very interested to see. I also think that there will be a possibility of competitors that do really well using a blend of both plant and milk-based. But that one on its own is going to totally change the game. Another big one that changed is the way things are scored. If you look at the new score sheet, there's many parts where the score used to be from 0 to 6 with half points allowed. It is now 0 to 3 and you're not allowed to give half points. One of the biggest ones this has landed on is accuracy of descriptors. And I think this one is huge because in the past, accurate descriptors is really tricky because you have to be really precise to get a really high score. So it's not enough just to say orange, you have to say what kind, or I've had competitors before where they said it was a certain fruit and the judge said, oh, it was actually like an overripe one or an underripe one. And even the subjectivity on it is really tricky. For me personally, in terms of the subjectivity and objectivity of flavor notes, I believe it sits sort of in the middle. We can all agree that something that's flavored to taste like orange tastes like a citrus fruit. If you think of the fact that synthesized flavor creates orange, it's more than possible that there are molecules which in coffee, which have the same structural shape to some of the compounds we associate with certain fruit. So I do think there's objectivity in the things that we taste when we call flavor notes. I think what's hard is that it's still going through a subjective person, that judge. And so by breaking it down to 0 to 3, what it's happening now is the judge wants to see a greater amount of accuracy. So they're not trying to go through every single thing and figure out what you did. It's more like, did you miss every flavor note? Did you have a general idea, or did you have most of the idea? And so I think it'll be a much easier process for competitors because they will be able to receive higher scores and more, I think, fair scores from it without having to worry about the judge's past experiences or their own approach to certain fruits. So I think that one is super interesting and will be good for both judges and competitors. Accuracy of tactile descriptors and taste descriptors, there's something sort of going on with both of those. If you look at the rules, they have moved aftertaste or the finish of the espresso into the taste experience part. And I think this is a great move. If you watch old competitions, when people give their tactile descriptors, they give a weight, they give a texture, and then they actually give a finish note. And it sometimes is, oh, it's kind of dry like this, but often it's just saying, oh, it has a long finish of brown sugar. And so that used to be categorized into tactile, but we all know that flavor is not a tactile experience. So by moving it out of tactile and into flavor, I think it's done a great thing. What this means for the competitions though, is it's going to be much harder to have those tactile and texture calls when it comes to describing the mouthfeel of your coffee, because previously all you needed to do was find the weight, maybe one texture thing, and then you had flavor. I think now to get really high accuracy, baristas are going to have to look up different ways that you can describe texture and weight when it comes to a liquid beverage. I think this is a tricky thing to do, and I think whoever does really well at Worlds in Athens will have sorted this part out because it is super key. Another thing in the tactile description is they still want to see good tactile quality. So even if you describe it well, it still has to have good texture. This is something that I think has carried through competitions for quite a while, is that we don't realize how important that tactile score is. If you add it up, it usually is one of the biggest things, that if your coffee has good mouthfeel, it's not dry, it's kind of heavy, you will score really, really high. And I think baristas often lose sight of this, especially when they're choosing their coffees. We pick coffees with exciting flavors that are interesting because that's what we want to drink every day. But it's super important, and even more so now that you have your tactile sorted, you know how to describe it, and it is a high quality tactile. The thing that I am most excited about for all the rule changes is actually at the bottom of the score sheet. So in the past, there was sort of overall impression, and this would allow the judge to look at your presentation, look at all the things you talked about, and give you a score that sort of catches the whole presentation, tries to wrap everything up. The problem with this score is that it was hard to actually give a high score to a competitor that maybe didn't serve the best coffee, but had a good message or showed knowledge. And so it basically became a multiplier of espresso along with some presentation, because it really came back down to the coffee every single time. What the new scores have is they have multiple areas where you can score well to succeed. There's things like how much did the barista know about coffee? Like, did they show that they know all these things about these courses? Was the presentation engaging, interesting? Did it show new things? And then there's that overall impression. To me, one of the most key things about the WBC is that once it gets to finals, in my opinion, the message starts to become more important, because if you think about it, only the judges on stage get to taste that coffee. So I think it's really key that the coffee is delicious, that it tastes really good, but ultimately, once it gets to finals, the taste of the coffee matters, but I think more so the message matters. And I think what this is going to allow barista competitions to do is to reward message more. Often, there's not a good place on the score sheet to reward if the barista has an important thing to say or something to contribute to the industry. There's no place to actually reward innovation. And so often what happens with competitors is they bring something just because they think it is cool. And one of the hard things about that is it's hard to prove that it works, because if you have a new technique, the only way to really show that it tastes better is to have it directly compared to the old way of doing it. So if you have a new way to serve espresso, a new cup or something like that, the judge doesn't actually know if it made it better. They just get that experience. And so as a competitor, you go into it hoping that's going to increase your cup score, but you don't actually get rewarded for the time it takes to explain it, any skepticism from the judges. And now there's actually part of that score sheet where the judge can say, they show me something new, even if it didn't contribute to the cup that I can tell, I'm able to reward them for having a new technique. So I think that this is maybe the most important part of the score sheet that's changed. I think it's an amazing thing to change because it has broad-reaching effects as well, where let's say there's a competitor that didn't serve their best coffee for whatever reason, they can still be rewarded by judges in a way that says, hey, you didn't serve me the best drink I had, but I loved your presentation and I rewarded you right here in the score sheet. You can see it. And so I think the outcomes for both people at the very top of the game and for people that are still finding their way in competition will mean happier outcomes, better scores, and I think a more accurate scoring. Especially I think if you talk to judges, they want to reward people in these areas, and it's just hard to do it. And so the score sheet, I think, is going to make the lives of both baristas and judges a lot easier. A bunch of rules changed on the brewer side. I haven't looked at them quite as much, but there's one thing that I think is super interesting, and it's how the format of the finals and the final competition will work. So in the past, there was just 2 rounds of Brewers Cup. There was one round where you would serve you the coffee that you brought. This is called open service. And then you would have to brew a random coffee, which is called compulsory service. They add those scores together, and then the highest 6 scores of that combined score go to finals. This, I think, worked in the past when the amount of competitors competing in brewers was quite small. Like in some of the early competitions, there's around 20 people. Now the size of brewers is almost as big as WBC. And what you run into, especially in Brewers Cup, where the scores are often very, very tight. If you look at them, it's like a point is a lot in Brewers Cup, is that let's say you had a judging panel that was not even miscalibrated, but was scored you slightly higher than a different panel might have, you might miss finals. And so what's happened now is that they've actually added an additional round. There's now a semifinals round, which I think is super interesting. So the way it works now is that everyone's going to compete. They're going to serve the coffee that they brought. That is going to get scored, and the top, I think it's 15 scores from that, they move on to semis. And that's when those semifinalists are going to brew the compulsory coffee, the coffee that is random, that they have to do a good job on, which I think is super interesting, where you can bring something amazing, and so that can lead to sort of availability of coffee, like what was available to you at that time. And that is sometimes unfair. I think it's a larger talk, but to make it from semis to finals, it is really going to be about your ability to brew a random coffee, and so it sort of shows the skill of the brewer. And then finals, you are going to serve the coffee you brought again, and that's going to be combined with your compulsory score. So to me, this is a way more fair system. I think it's going to shake things up quite a bit because it's a huge change to the way the competition works. I also think it's going to make it more exciting. You get to watch a competitor through 3 ounce competition, you get to know them a bit better, you cheer for them more, and I think at the end the result is even more exciting. So I think that the WCE has done an amazing job on the rules changes. I'm excited to see how they are implemented at Athens, and I think it's going to be really exciting.